Okay, is it started? Hold on. It's like Malka just texted me for low phones. There we go. I'm like, seriously, like weeks to plan camp, and today she's asking me for logos for bags. I'm like, just.
Yeah. Okay. Hi, Michael. Good morning.
How are you doing?
Really good. Baruch Hashem.
I got my I said I have my camera working, but seemingly everything else has gone wrong today. So I have two technicians working at the house. So
Oh, wow.
yeah, so I'm just hanging out here today, or at least for the morning anyway. I'm hoping they'll finish up shortly. But thank you for jumping on to Zoom with me. I appreciate that. I sent an email earlier in the morning. I'm not sure if you got that or not.
So now that Myra mentioned to me that you're not going to be able to come, I checked my email and I saw.
Yeah. No.
But I didn't have the chance to check my email since I davened Shachris this morning.
I think that we are not in the crisis mode, so we're fine.
Yeah, we're good. We're good.
Great.
I love the globe you have in the background.
Oh yeah, I've had that for many decades. I'm just used to sitting at the desk and having a globe there. And you can't see them from this projection, but I have two pictures that have traveled with me from my undergraduate days that I keep in the library here. So it's comfortable feeling. This one of the only rooms that still has my up north furniture and not the new version for Florida. So I like that.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
Yeah. So just the two of us?
Yep. That's what we have.
Not that I don't like other people, but this is always workable for me.
I was having my suspicions. Maybe you just don't like people.
I'm never comfortable in big crowds. Even though I've had some large organizations reporting to me, it's easier when you're standing at a podium and talking than when you're just interacting one-on-one. So, as I say, the 2-3 people, that works for me great. So no problem. Anyway, so did you, I feel bad. Did you get a chance to eat some breakfast?
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. This is a normal morning, let's just say.
Okay, this one is probably a good one in that I was confused more than a few times, not because the material was that confusing in end of 6B, beginning of 7A and 7A and B. It's just that there were so many versions and measures and configurations that after a while it was hard to follow, which was which. The other problem that I had, just so you're oriented before we start, when I was reading, trying to read 7, was that I'm really not that familiar with the laws of Eruv and how Shabbos Eruv and relates to Sukkah, and that one confused me as well. But that's a matter of not the discussion, but my familiarity with Eruvin.
Yeah. So I honestly, I don't think we'll get to the Shabbos Erev part today.
Good.
Maybe.
No, that's fine. I'd like to go slow.
Yeah. So I assume we won't get there. But the other part we definitely we'll get into. I don't know if we'll be able to finish. We'll see. We're going to get into all those different opinions about where to put that extra small wall. Definitely get there. We almost finished the section from last time about the Gemara was challenging. The Gemara finished off by saying, "Oh, Rabbi Judah, he learns that a sukkah has to be a minimum of 10 handbreadths. It's not sourced in the words of the Torah anywhere. Rather, it was a tradition from Moshe Rabbeinu." That was the conclusion. And the Gemara said that. We said there's a lot more things that were part of this. It gave 3 categories, and the Gemara attacked each category by saying, "What do you mean it's not sourced in the words of the Torah? I'll show you clearly where it's found." And every time the Gemara had an answer, whether it was the words that are quoted are not, we're really talking about something else. They just used it as a support, or we said a very specific part of the law came from Moshe Rabbeinu, but the general law, it was known otherwise. I don't know what the third one was. And the other one was about the measurements. So we said, the measurements also they weren't they weren't clear. They're not clear in the Torah. It's just relying on it. Okay, I'm forgetting one. Anyways, so at the end of that, the Gemara asks. This is where we kind of rushed at the end. We didn't really get into it much, but the Gemara asked that if, according to the Torah law, for immersion in the mikvah, for it to be considered invalid, it needs to be majority of the hair needs to have the substance or whatever that's getting in the way of the water, and it needs to bother the person. So, and we said the rabbis added a layer to that. They said even if you only have one of these components, they're already going to consider the immersion invalid. So the Gemara asked, according to that logic, why don't we? And you're worried that if we, and why they make it, why they consider such an immersion not valid? Because you have a person might make a mistake and think, oh, just like I went into the mikvah with this issue last time, I can do it again, and they won't realize that they have that second component also, and this time it would be considered invalid. So they were careful as a safeguard. So according to that logic, they should make, even if someone has less than majority interposing between the water and his body and doesn't mind, still we should make it an issue because they won't realize. And next time they will mind, or next time it will cover most of their body, and they won't, and they'll think that the immersion is fine. But the rabbi said such an immersion is not. So the Gemara answered, no, we don't go this far. Whenever we make these safeguards, it's only a safeguard for the Torah law, but they don't make a safeguard on their own law. If that law itself was a safeguard, in other words, the words the Gemara uses, like we read last week, it says this ruling itself is a restrictive enactment. So we're not going to make should we come and institute a restrictive enactment against the possibility of infringing of another restrictive enactment? So we don't do it. So that's a principle. We didn't focus on it so much last week, but that's a principle to know in general, that the idea of in gzera l'gzera. They don't make a protection for something that was in its own right of protection. Okay, that's where we finished off last week. Then the Gemara just finishes off by saying, one second, let's focus. We said that the laws of walls, mechitzos, are partitions, were passed down from Moshe Rabbeinu. And which law is that referring to specifically? We said it's referring to the sukkah. The fact that a sukkah has to be, the minimum of the walls have to be 10 handbreadths, besides for the roof. But the Gemara says, one second, that all fits with Rabbi Yehuda, who didn't have any source for the 10 tefachim, for the 10 handbreadths. But Rabbi Meir, who did have a source from the wings of the angels, of the kruvim. the cherubs. So he did have a source. So similar question to what we did before. Why is this claimed to be something that we only know from Moshe Rabbeinu, but we don't know it from the written Torah? Seemingly based with all the clues that he used, that the wings are considered schach, and we figured out that it was a 10 handbreadths space between. So seemingly he used the written Torah to figure this out. It's not something that needed to be transmitted orally and only orally. So what is, in other words, what would he say was transmitted about partitions that we only know from an oral source? And the Gemara answers, what do you mean? There's so many laws of partitions that aren't written in the Torah, and we already learned about them. And I'm sure when you read it, you're like, yeah, we already learned about it. When it comes to the lavud, which means things that are less than 3 handbreadths apart, we consider it the space filled. We learned about the walls. This we didn't learn about it so much, but we touched upon about the walls going up or extending up or extending down. That's called good, either achas or asik. We'll talk about those different places in the tractate. And the third one was the bent wall, which we also spoke about. So the fact that seemingly these are all, again, not physical things. Where did it come from? So it wasn't something that the rabbis just made up. It was something that was passed down, that we consider this gap filled. We consider the wall extended. We consider the wall bent. These are all things that were passed down, and that's how we consider partitions. And I don't even think necessarily it's only in regards to sukkah. I think there are other. These are laws in general that are used in many other places, like you saw about Erev and things like that. So that's in the Gemara. There's a 2 dots there. In the Hebrew side, there's a 2 dots, and that kind of signifies, okay, we finished this. Usually, it will signify that we finished discussing a certain part of the Mishnah, and now we're moving on to the next part. We spoke about this once. Just want to show it to you again. If you look, actually, no, you don't have the actual page of the Gemara.
No.
Can I show it to you? I'll try, but I don't know. It's too small. But basically, anytime you have,
in the
I
past,
showed you that, right? Anytime you have 2 dots, and then a few words later you have another 2 dots.
yes.
It's almost always quoting a part of the Mishnah that it's about to discuss.
Okay, I didn't remember the 2 dots and then followed by another 2 dots. So, okay, that's a new one for me.
Yeah, so it's almost like a quotation. That's like the Gemara's version of quotation marks.
Okay.
We're about to quote a new part of the Mishnah that we didn't discuss yet, and close the conversation. We're moving on to interpret the next part of the Mishnah, or discuss the next part of the Mishnah. So the parts that we discussed already was it can't be higher than 20. We discussed that the minimum is 10 handbreadths. Besides for the roof, that was the next part of the Mishnah. Here's the third law of the Mishnah about having 3 walls. The fourth one was about the shade. We'll get to later. So here we're discussing the third part of the Mishnah. So right away, the Gemara starts off with something called a brisa. If you remember, we discussed a brisa was not. It's the same people, same sages that are written in the Mishnah that speak in the Mishnah, but it was the parts that weren't included in the final version. It was things that people passed down. Oh, Rabbi Meir said this, Rabbi Huda said that, whatever. It was part of the tradition, but it didn't get in the written form, in the written tradition, in the Mishnah. But it was still continuously taught from generation to generation, just like the oral law was always taught. So they quote the brisa that says that even though the Mishnah says 3 walls, it really means 2 proper walls, and a third one, even if it's just a handbreadth. That is the rabbi's opinion. That's the majority opinion. But it does quote the minority opinion, Reb Shimon. He holds that it has to be 3, not 2, it has to be 3 full walls, and a fourth could be just a tefach, just a handbreadth. Okay, so again, is it 3 plus or 4 plus? That's the argument. Now, the Gemara is going to ask, where do they argue from? Like, on what point do they differ that splits their opinion? Obviously, they agree a lot about a sukkah. They even agree that one of the walls don't need to be a full wall. So where did it come about? Their argument. Gemara will ask us a lot. In Hebrew, in the Gemara language, it's b'mai kamifli. B'mai in what? Similar to the Hebrew word ma, like ma nishtana, as what is tonight different than the other nights by the Seder, by Passover? Ma nishtana. So in Aramaic, it's not ma, it's mai. Very similar. So b'mai kamifli. And what are they arguing about? What are they different? What splits them? Like if you, as you read it, you'll see the Gemara gives many options. We'll get into that in a second. I wanted to make sure we had clear some of the main principles that we need to know in order to do that. First of all, we're going to need to know a verse or
Okay,
two
now,
verses.
Before we get to the verse, just a question that I wasn't sure of. And again, I only have the English version. The rabbis hold that the traditional scriptural text is authoritative, while Rabbi Simon holds that the traditional reading is authoritative. Traditional text versus traditional reading. What that one I wasn't sure.
Yeah, so that's how I'm going to get to. That will be my second step. First, I want to show you the verse itself. I mean, you don't have it, but I'll read it to you. I'll read it to you in English first. It says, where do I have it here? It says, in Sukkahs you shall dwell for a 7-day period. Every native in Israel shall dwell in Sukkah, so that your generations will know that I caused the children of Israel to dwell in Sukkah. We read this verse in the first page, if you recall. Now, this verse is like we said, it's the main verse that talks about the mitzvah of Sukkah. And if there's a difference between the way it's written and the way it's read. In general, in the Torah, it will happen. It's often, not like every, not so often, but it's common, very common. You have this idea that there's the way it's written and the way it's read. We'll find. I'll tell you what it means in this scenario here specifically soon. But just in general, both of them were passed down. Meaning, in other words, like this. Let's just talk about the history for a second. Moshe Rabbeinu, before the end of his life, Moses, before the end of his life, wrote down the entire Torah. The last 8 verses where it talks about his death, that's there's 2 opinions. Either he wrote about it like right before it happened, or that Joshua wrote down. But the rest of the Torah was Moshe Rabbeinu wrote down himself, word for word, letter for letter, and he gave. It says he wrote. I forgot how many scrolls he wrote. He wrote a significant amount. I think 12, one for each tribe or something like that. He wrote a Torah, letter for letter, and that's the Torah that we have today. Literally, from the same words, same what's it called? There's only one throughout, even though it's been thousands of years. Yeah, over 3,000 years, there's only one letter that there's a disagreement about how it's written. Every Torah scroll is the same, since Moshe Rabbeinu. Very meticulously make sure that it was to the letter. Every letter was the same. The only letter they argue about now is it's the word is the same. It's just does it finish with a silent hey or a silent aleph? That's the difference. But so definitely the words of the Torah, the way they're written, to the letter, are very tradition based, very from generation to generation, literally for thousands of years to Moses, which is a cool thing in its own right. But then there's also when he gave the Torahs, he transmitted that there are certain words that aren't read the way they're written. Not drastically different. We're not talking about, something majorly different, but there are certain words that are meant to be read slightly differently than the way they're written. That was also from part of the tradition, again, for thousands of years. We've always known that it's read a little differently. So again, equally tradition, but just one's written and one's the way it's read. I mean, for example, what do I mean by the way it's read? Let's say the rabbi at synagogue is going to be reading from the Torah. He's going to be seeing a word but not pronouncing exactly the way he's seeing it. He knows already because he prepared it, and he knows before it says where the words are read a little differently. So he'll know from before already. And if you look in a Chumash, usually it will like have the word the way it's written, and then in parentheses or something like that, put the way it's going to be read. Also, so you know, like if the rabbi is reading it, and all of a sudden it was a little different than what it's in the Chumash, like you should know that like the tradition is to read this word a little differently. So don't be surprised.
Okay.
That's the idea. Now, what we're getting to is okay, and now how does it play out in this verse? So, in this verse, the change is very, very subtle, very, very subtle. There's the Hebrew alphabet has vowels, and you don't need to use a letter for a vowel. It's like the dots and the
Hebrew alphabet has consonants.
Consonants. Okay, I've never heard that word.
The vowels are like the A, E, I, O, U.
Right, exactly. So those are not so you can have a word without but on the other hand, there are certain letters that are vowel letters, meaning the classic one is like I say a yud, anochi, the first one of the 10 commandments, anochi, finished over the yud. It kind of gives, and usually when we'll have a vowel, it means it's a vowel letter also. It gives the pronunciation of that vowel a little more strength. I don't know the way when it's pronounced. Nowadays, it won't really make a difference, but that's the concept. So in this verse specifically, there is the word sukkot, and the second letter, the kaf, sukkot, could have it's pronounced with a chaylam. That would be that's the vowel, the consonant that it has. The ko, sukkot. Now that could have a vav or not have a vav. So in the written verse, in the way it's written, the first two times it mentions, first again, it has 3 times. It mentions the word sukkot 3 times. Same, but it's the first 2 times when the way it's written is without a vav. The last time it does have a vav. Now, in pronunciation, not necessarily does it change much, because like I said, maybe you stress it a little bit more, so you won't really notice a big difference. But in meaning, there's a big difference, because if you add a vav to a word, that makes it plural. It makes it plural. So it would be sukkot without a vav, it would mean just one sukkah. When it says sukkot with a vav, all of a sudden now it's plural. It's 2 sukkot. So that's the general. That's how it plays out here. So again, in theory, if you would have no vav, you would want to read it maybe in a different way, like sukkat or something like that, because it doesn't have a vav, and it would mean 1 because it was passed down to still be pronounced sukkot, not sukkat. So in the reading, it means 2 when you read it, even though when it's written, it only looks like 1. When you read it, the way it's read, sukkot, as if it has the vav, it would be plural. So this is where it comes in. How many sukkahs are mentioned here? And we're going to use that for how many walls are needed. So if you hold that it's only there's one more introduction before we jump in. Another thing is we're gonna take it for granted, but at the end we're gonna see maybe we shouldn't be taking it for granted that one of the words sukkot you can't touch, you can't learn anything from it, because it's here just to introduce to you the idea of sukkah in general. Yeah, you can't say it's. A lot of times we'll learn out something because this word is extra. Why is it here? It didn't have to be written. It's trying to teach you something. But the first one, the Gemara assumes, of course you can't learn anything from it, because how else would I know even what we're talking about if it didn't use the word sukkah? So the first time it mentions the word sukkah is just introducing to you the whole idea of sukkah. You can't touch it. You can't learn from it. You can only learn out from the subsequent ones and say, oh, the Torah said against sukkah, said against sukkah. then you can learn out. For now, we're going to take that for granted that you can't learn out from the first time it mentions it. But later on, we're going to say, you know what? Maybe that could be where they're arguing. Do you learn out from?
You froze up on my screen.
This is how it goes. Again, so the first time it mentions is without a vav. That's one sukkah. The second time it mentions sukkah again, it's without a vav. That's two. And then the third time it's with a vav. So that add another two. The minimum of plural is two. Remember, we always stick to the minimum. So the minimum of plural is two. So you have a total of four. That's if you would go according to the way it's written. But if you go according to the way it's read, so you have the first one is plural. Second one is plural, so that's two. The second one is plural, that's two. And the third one is plural, that's two. So you have a total of 6.
Right.
Okay, so again, the difference is how much, based on if you say what's primary, the way it's written, the way it's read, you'll end up with 4 or 6. Okay, now, remember we mentioned the first word you can't learn out from. So you have to, if you ended up with a total of 4, you have to minus 1, because not 2, only 1, because that word was with the first time it's mentioned is without a vav, so it's only singular. So you take off 1. And if you were 6, because you consider the reading the more important, so then you have to minus the first word, which is read as a plural word, which gave you 2, so you have to minus 2, so you end up with 4. So in other words, you end up with 4 or you end up with 3.
That makes a lot more sense because the English translation has the word Sukkot occurs twice defectively and once plain or complete. And when I saw it appears twice defectively, I couldn't figure out what that meant. But now that you explain that there's more of a singular usage and a plural usage, now it makes sense.
Right. Yeah. So defectively over here it means like, is it missing that vav? It's defective. It could have been written out fully, spelled out fully with its vav, the letter vav from the alphabet, but it's in this case it was written defectively without that vav, even though it's still pronounced as if it has that. Okay. So so far again we have an argument. Do we end up with 4? Do we end up with 3? Based on written or pronounced. Now. There was a tradition. Part of the tradition we mentioned earlier, that when it comes to partitions, there's traditions about what's necessary, and part of that tradition was that a sukkah need the last wall. The last wall only needs 1 tefach instead of a full 7. Remember we mentioned that a minimum length of the wall has to be 7. There was an argument, but that was we said the halacha is it has to be 7 handbreadths. So the last wall, whatever your last wall is, the last wall doesn't need to be 7, it could be just 1. That was the tradition that was passed down again from Moses. So if you end up with 4, so you take away the most of the fourth wall, and it's 3 plus. Or if you ended up with 3, you take away most of the third wall, and you end up with 2 plus. That's the first simple way of explaining the argument between the rabbis. And Rabbi Shimon, again, the rabbi said it's 2 and 1 handbreadth. Rabbi Shimon said it's 3 and 1 handbreadth. Where does that come from? Based on if you say written form is primary or pronounced form is primary, that math will end up with 2 plus or 3 plus. Okay. So far, is that clear? Any questions on that part?
No, I think it's clear. What I was surprised at was that Rab Simeon, I have it here, Shimon, had his position of the 4 walls, 3 and a little wall, but he never cited the notion of that is also more consistent with the idea of a shelter as opposed to
Right.
some other kind of structure. But that didn't come into this discussion.
Right. No, so interesting. At the end, after all the different options of what they're arguing about, at the end, there's a new rabbi comes in with his own source for Rabbi Shimon. Yeah, which that's what you read. He quotes the verse, which we actually mentioned also this verse earlier, if you remember. On the second side of the first page, we discussed the sukkah needs to be the source of the sukkah needing to provide shade, yeah, and that the schach needs to give that shade was also from this verse, which we discussed this verse before. He brings in this verse from Shimon, from Simon's opinion. I'll tell you that it needs to be some sort of shelter, and therefore you can't just have, it needs to have 4 walls like a shelter. And then the tradition tells you to minus the 4th wall. Now, an interesting way to conjoin this with what we discussed till now is what I read. What he's really saying is, why did what told Reb Simon to learn this verse in the way that he's learning it? Whatever we're going to say, all the different options of his opinion is he's inspired by this verse about the shelter. Because you remember, this verse from the shelter is not from the 5 books. It's in the prophets. We're quoted from Isaiah. Usually we don't learn out the laws of Torah Mitzvot are only learned out from the 5 books. That's where they come from. So the question they asked on him, like, why are you bringing a verse from Isaiah? And like we've already mentioned, it's not even talking about a sukkah really, the holiday of Sukkot. It uses the word sukkah, but it's not talking about the holiday of Sukkot. So one of the explanations I saw was that it's really that he took inspiration from this verse. This verse is telling you that a sukkah should be a shelter. So therefore, he interpreted the actual verse about sukkah in the 5 books in the way that he did. That it should have a 4th wall. Okay, you know what? There's a tradition that 4th wall doesn't need to be complete, but at least it should have this shelter structure.
Yeah. Once you started discussing it, I remembered from last week when I was reading it, I interpreted that more narrowly as shadow. So protection from the heat, and also essentially like a giant umbrella to keep rain off of you. But I missed the part where he was interpreting that more as a shelter. So that makes sense to me, that tying that to the 4 walls. So I like that. That's more clear.
I think the way Rashi explains it is, if I remember correctly, when I was glancing over it, it's the rain part that really the wind, like a rainstorm. Like if you don't have 4 walls, you're not going to be protected from a rainstorm.
Right.
Like that was that's the specific part of the verse that it's referring to.
Makes sense.
Okay, so that was option number 1 of understanding where the rabbis and Reb Simon and Shimon disagree. Where do they split? Is how many numbers do you end up with? You end up with 4 or 3. And why do you end up with 4 or 3 is basically if you say the written form is primary or the pronounced form is primary. That was option number 1. Option number 2, the Gemara offers, is it's easier for me if I look in the Hebrew just for a second. Okay. Option number 2 is that everyone really agrees that you follow the primaries the way it's read. Okay, in other words, the Gemara, the reason why it's giving all these options, it doesn't want to have a conclusion, which one's primary, written or whatever, because it could be in other times the rabbis will say something else. So it kind of leaves everything, it gives all the options on the table, so you don't have a conclusion about that discussion about which one's primary. So here it's going to give an option for everyone to agree that the way it's written, the way it's read is primary. So then where do they differ? So they differ if you have to minus 1 for the idea of schach, the idea of the root of a sukkah. Again, a sukkah gets, so to speak, 6 shout outs, in the verse. You have to minus 2 because of one of the words are necessary to introduce the whole idea of sukkah. So you end up with 4. Now, the rabbis hold you need to take away one for the idea of schach, the idea of the rooftop. It has its own, needs its own mention. So you end up with 3, and then and you can finish off the way we finished off last time. You minus the third one because of the tradition. Now, on the other hand, Reb Shimon, he holds that no, the schach is so much integral part of a sukkah, and if you mention sukkah, you're mentioning schach also. It's not like, and we discussed this already on the first page. A sukkah is called sukkah because of its schach. So he holds that you take this so far that a sukkah is the schach, that when the Torah mentioned sukkah in the first word, it was referring to schach, and it doesn't need its own, its own mention, so to speak. So you still end up with 4, and like we said, you minus the fourth one to just one handbreadth because of the tradition. So again, this way of learning would be that everyone holds, it goes according to the way it's pronounced, the way it's read, which you end up with 6 minus one word, end up with 4. And the question is, do you minus the fourth one for the schach or not? That is that option. Okay. The Gemara gives another option. Sorry, is that clear? Any questions on
Yes,
that?
no, that one no, that's clear.
Okay, amazing.
I was, I got, when I first read it, I was a little confused on the issue of first references versus other masters, when they were, talking about how to interpret all of that. But as you go through it, I'm fine now.
Okay, amazing. So the next one is the opposite, leaving the option for the other way. Maybe everyone holds that you follow the way it's written, not the way it's read, which is opposite of what we just said. Maybe everyone holds that the primary is the way it's written. So where do they differ? Again, if you go according to the way it's written, you should end up with 3. First one is singular, second one is singular, third one is plural. You might have to minus the first time because of just to introduce the whole idea. So you end up with 3. And where they differ is, was the tradition to add a wall, add a 1 tefach wall, or was it to minus to a 1 tefach wall? So you have 3, and they're arguing with the tradition to add a tefach to the 3, and it would be 3 plus, like Reb Shimon, or was it to minus from a wall to end up with just 1 handbreadth, and that would take away from the 3 to get the 2 plus. That would be the argument. So again, the arguing is they're agreeing on everything. You follow the written tradition. You have to take away one of them to introduce the whole idea. But the question is, was the tradition itself to add or to take away? Was it to add a whole new handbreadth, add a whole new wall, a handbreadth wall, but a whole new wall, or was it to take away from what you have and make that wall, the last wall, 1 handbreadth? And therefore that would tell you 3 plus or 2 plus.
Okay.
Or in other words, the 3.
Yeah, I say, by the way, I'm trying to go reading some of the notes on one screen, reading text on the other screen, and watching you on the third. So if you see me looking, but we've got.
That's okay. That's definitely okay. So what ends up being the argument is it 3 plus or 3 minus? That kind of is what the argument ends up according to this option.
Okay.
Now there's one more, if I remember correctly. There's one more. This is the one I touched upon earlier. That in this version we're going to say, oh, maybe we shouldn't take it for granted that you minus that you don't count the first word because it needs to be introduced. In this version, again, everyone holds it's the way it's written. So you should have 4. Now everyone holds that it's to minus, so it's definitely 3 plus. The question is, do you minus another one to introduce the idea or not? So if you say that you don't count the first time it's written because you need to introduce the idea, you end up with 2 plus. If you say no, even though you need a word to introduce it, but on the other hand, you still count it. You don't minus it just because it's needed for the introduction. Therefore, you end up with 3 plus because you have 4, but you minus because of the tradition, you minus to 3 plus. That is the
Just a general question, and I think you answered it earlier on. When you're looking at these, repetitions of an item, is it typical in other situations as well where one word, the first word introduces the law that they're talking about, and subsequent ones inform the numbers or details, or is it special to this particular text?
It's interesting. It's a very good question. I was thinking about it when I was reading it, because it's definitely not common. You don't see them counting, and making, and doing plural and this and that. You don't find it so often. So I would assume it's only here. I do want to say though that obviously you'll definitely see the Gemara always being very careful. Like, why does it have this? You already mentioned it. Why do you have to say it again? I just haven't seen this like counting 6, 4, 3. That you don't see so much. And I assume it's only here because not only a sukkah has this like 4 walls and stuff like that. Like these numbers, the number game, so to speak. And then by other things where it's not a number game, it doesn't really the number part wouldn't play in. You would still want to learn out why it mentions a few times, but it wouldn't play into a numbers game. It would play more into, so this word is extra, so it's trying to teach us a new law, like a whole new concept, something more along those lines. It won't get into the numbers game. A sukkah is more of a numbers game, so therefore, how many walls, this and that. That's why I think we're doing that. But it is a good question. I don't have a official answer. Just attempt.
That's why I was confused. I looked back and I saw that I had dropped my keypad. Okay.
Now it should all be clicking.
Now it will all be held in, right? Sorry.
Definitely. Okay. So just want to add. I remember I saw it in the note here. I just forgot about it. The way just to help. In other words, what was bothering me is in the beginning, the Gemara assumes that you can't use the first word, right? And it makes sense. It's to introduce the idea. What changed here? Like why is it all of a sudden an option? So the way it's explained is, in general, in order to introduce the idea, you need to mention it. You can't like talk about a sukkah without saying that you're talking about a sukkah, right? So it's never extra. But once the Gemara went out of the verse went out of its way and mentioned it a few more times, so you see the verse is doing this on purpose to start using the words and start counting them, and therefore once the verse did that with the extra superfluous time, so you'll say it also intends you should count the first time. Meaning in general, obviously when you mention it, it's just to introduce the idea. But once you see the verse is already starting to get into account, then it tells you that also the first word should be part of that count. That's how Rabbi Shimon learns. The rabbis don't learn like that. They say, no, always when it's introducing a concept, you stick to that. So that it's just to introduce you the whole concept. And that's it. So where we're holding now in the English would be Ramat Naset. Yeah, do you have that?
I've got it now. Yeah.
Okay, so everything we discussed until there. This we also discussed. We touched upon that Ramat said that Rav Shimon has his own source from Isaiah that it needs to be this shelter for protecting from rainstorms, and we already discussed that it's the way it's interpreted. What he's trying to say is that this inspired him. This verse inspired him to learn that a sukkah needs to have be more enclosed. It can't just have 2 and a bit, which is very exposed. It has to be more of an enclosed area, and that's why he interpreted these verses that we mentioned earlier. Whatever the option was, one of the 4 options of learning where he got it from, but that's why he chose that. Okay. Which, by the way, it's always I spoke about this on Monday on my Talmud topics class a little bit about that people can argue like about how to interpret a verse or whatever, but there's always a layer deeper. What's causing them to interpret the verse in that way? And it usually comes from a perspective change, a certain understanding of the whole law and they understand the law in a certain way, and that causes them to interpret the verse in a certain way. So that's what you would see here, because he saw this verse in Isaiah, and that inspired him, so to speak. That told him how a sukkah should be, and that caused him to interpret the verses here in this specific way. Again, so I'm just introducing this idea that they could argue how to interpret a verse, but it really always it comes from a layer deeper. You won't usually find it in the Gemara. Sometimes it will try to get to that layer deeper, sometimes not. But definitely in the commentaries, almost always you'll find them try to dig into why they interpret the verse. What was causing that difference? What's the difference in perspective of this law? How are they looking at this law differently, and that causes them to interpret it? That's part of the fun. So
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of that.
Yeah. Okay, that's what we're holding. We could I'll give you either we could continue. But we're not going to be able to finish, obviously, all the different opinions of how to place this one extra tefach, this one tefach wall. We could either start it now and continue next week, or if you want, maybe we'll stop. If you want, we could stop a little earlier and then put it all in one time. We'll be able to organize it properly.
We can start it next week as a complete segment. That would be good. Hopefully live in person, not via Zoom.
By the way, I just wanted to show you. You don't really have drawings, pictures in the Gemara so much, but on this page is one of the few pages. Next few pages have drawings. You see on the side.
Oh, yeah. That
probably would have helped you.
When were those drawings added to the that edition?
So it's interesting. I mean, every time is a different story.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that these are Rashi's. They're not really meant for the Gemara, because the Gemara itself, there's different opinions of what the Gemara is saying in this. And we're not going to do all the opinions, and it'll really leave you confused unless we're going to sit on it for many hours. But Rashi interprets what it means. Let's say the Gemara says here, it has to be, where is this rule? Slanting position, right? It says, why not place in a slanting position? What does slanting position mean? Where are you slanting it? So Rashi has his thing, Tosfos has his own thing, or exactly. So Rashi kind of wanted. It's hard to explain it in words, so he also added some drawings.
The drawings are helpful. As I mentioned, I was watching a YouTube that had some illustrations, and that was helpful. But I couldn't go back and forth with that and the text, so it was, not as easy for me as I had hoped. But the diagrams are helpful, especially as we get on to that next piece. It's very helpful. So,
especially what?
Oh, when we get on to the next piece about Eruv and thin versus thick posts, and where
it's interesting, because so much of this tractate is structural, changes, little differences, in the structure, which is a little hard to put down on paper. So when I learned this, I don't know if you remember, I mentioned I learned this in 9th grade.
Right.
So when we learned in 9th grade, they told us, get the Gemara with the pictures. Most tractates don't have pictures in the back, but they made us specifically for Sukkah. They made one with like a whole section, literally, I don't know, probably 100 pages of illustrations of all the different, because think about it. There's all the different sizes of the Sukkah, shade, this, that. We're going to get into how the skach is positioned. We're going to get into, is there a tree over it? Is this, is that? We're going to get into, and then the 4 species. Part of the tractate talks about the 4 things that the lulav and the etrog. What color is it? It has this defect, that defect. And it's hard to, it gives a lot of illustration. I should probably get my hands on it, and maybe I could send you some of the pictures.
So I have to see their illustration of the sukkah on a boat. That was another one. I had two examples where there were some discussions about that. But anyway, let's pick it up. So we're going to pick it up from beginning of 7A next time, or
Oh, no, it's the bottom of six.
bottom of 6B.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, amazing. Next week, my Hindi or the Shiner family has a wedding in Atlanta. Rabbi Tani's brother's son is getting married. Her nephew. That's not what color that needed to be. My wife's cousin, my mother-in-law's nephew, is getting married in Atlanta.
Yeah.
So we're having like a wedding, and then the Shabbat brachas and whatever. So we're not going to be here for Shabbos. So
Okay.
we're not going to be here for Friday. So we'll do the Zoom again next week.
We'll do it by Zoom next week. If you're in the midst of on Friday and travel is never automatic, just shoot me an email if it's going to be a problem, and we'll pick it up the following week. But I'll just assume Zoom for now.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so I'll try to keep you posted if anything changes. I'll even try to confirm with you like that we're on, that we're gonna do it. And
Enjoy
yeah.
the wedding. I say enjoy the wedding. I'd like to say enjoy the travel, but these days that's not easy.
Don't scare me. Don't scare me.
Now, are you taking the baby or keeping?
Oh, sure. Yeah, we're taking the baby. She's
Okay.
she's been to New York with us. She's been to Aruba
Yeah.
with us. She's going to Atlanta with us.
Okay,
She's a
good.
traveler. She's a hefty traveler. Thank God.
Good.
And so
Okay.
I remember every time we go on the plane, everyone like freaks out. Like, oh, baby, like hope she's not sitting next to me. And then she sleeps the whole flight. Thank God. And everyone comes over to us like, oh, I didn't hear a sound. She's such a good baby. And we were all worried. They're like, yeah. We have a good.
Like I say, I am happy that you're traveling for a good occasion, not some of the other reasons we travel. But meanwhile, I appreciate it. You cleared up a few of the really sticky issues that I've had, but it almost makes me say that it would be better if I learned more of the Aramaic so I wouldn't get hung up with things like defective words. So, anyway, you take care.
Michael, mate, you're saying we should, instead of making a learning Hebrew course, we should make a learning Aramaic course.
There we go.
Mommy synagogue will be very far advanced if you had to.
Yeah, we'll have to, wait till you get back, but when you get back, we'll have to have a conversation about Jill's interest in learning how to read Hebrew, and just to get a better level of comfort in this stuff. And so you'll know all the options there at the show and can help recommend the best course for her, or best thing for her to do. But she's looking forward to that.
Definitely.
And for now, I'll let you go. I will get back to my technicians. Not a pleasure, but I'll do it. And
Best of luck with that.
I really appreciate your willingness to jump on Zoom with me.
Sure. Quick question. Would you want me to, because you didn't come in, would you want me to drop off the challah by you? I'm anyways heading around town.
I didn't order a challah this week because I still had some in the freezer from last week. So I went easy, and Jill doesn't eat it because she's trying to not eat eggs and dairy, and I love that stuff. So no, I thought about that, but no, I wouldn't. I wouldn't do that to you, as you know. Deliver a challah, but I can't say that will never come up. So now I have here Yehoshua Krasnianski. Is that another family member, or is that a name that you go by otherwise?
It's my pen name, my stage name.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm kidding. My full name is Yehoshua Tanchum.
Okay.
And the nickname Tani comes from Tanchum, but my legal name, when it comes to legal things, since my first name is Yoshua, so that's the
Oh,
one I
okay.
have to use.
Yeah, I
So
looked,
I think when I applied for this account on Zoom, I put in Yoshua. So that's
I
I
thought
should
maybe
probably
you had a twin brother or something who was doing the lesson today.
I just didn't tell you.
Anyway, thank you again.
Of course. Have amazing Shabbos.
You as well have a great Shabbat. Here.